And we're back, part two. So we pick up where, Ruth has done also 180, aside from Jonah with Wendy and especially Marty. And let's just be honest. Low-key, it's not so apparent in the first 7 episodes, but I think more towards the last 7 episodes, I think, realize that this is a love letter, and we're essentially saying goodbye to Ruth's character. She was affected in every sense of the word. I mean, since the birds, came into her life, and again, she also was already coming from a checkered past. Her father was kind of a deadbeat. She was kind of left to her own devices. A good portion of her youth was spent in juvie for petty theft and a number of other things. So she was kind of, unfortunately, one of those victims who fell through the cracks. And had maybe Marty not infiltrated, I mean, she'd had for her family, but the likeliness of her ending up in jail probably would have been much more greater. And I mean, that could have happened also with Marty's influence, because he eventually taught her how to do the money laundering. So, yes and no. It's hard to watch because, she thought she had found somebody who could love her and wouldn't judge her, but that met its demise, just for the simple fact that he would have just ratted them out. He was already, Ben, Wendy's brother, was already kind of going off the rails, calling cops and letting it be known what was happening, just because he wasn't well. He wasn't well in the head. So that was hard for her to grasp and understand and process. So, she builds up resentment as well. But she has been smart with her money, to the point where she has enough money and decides to go into the business on her own, and buys, which is so funny because we kind of bookend here, because that's how we were introduced to Ruth's character, which, by the way, fabulously played by Julia Gardner. Really, again, she could pass, and her face is very youthful, that she could pass for younger. I think she's 28, but she's passing as a 19-year-old here. And that southern twang, for somebody who's from the Bronx, like, girl, yes, represent New York, girl. She's from Riverdale. It's like, oh, when I look all this information up, I was like, I would have thought she was straight southern, born and raised. That twang comes in really, really nicely. That when I started seeing interviews where I was like, oh, she's not from the South. Anyway, she fits in perfect here. And so she has invested her money wisely. She buys the Lazy O, which is how we met her. She was first working at the Lazy O as like a hotel cleaning person, maid, and concierge, I think. And she was stealing stealing from the guests. And then to now, for it to come full circle, she goes back at the same hotel where she was fired and meets the same lady that fired her. But now she has enough money to fire her, buys the property from the owner. And again, it's not because necessarily she wants that property. She needs a real establishment so she can money launder money, which would be connected to Darlene's heroin that she's selling, on the low. So, and Darlene, now that she's been left, she's our resident. All these people are resident of this particular town, right, or area in the Ozarks. And which also, not for nothing, that's why we have to pick apart what we're seeing, because even though the birds are beloved and we don't want them to be harmed, because we've grown attached to these characters, but essentially they are that kind of like the monsters here, because they've infiltrated this town. They've taken away business from the locals. Wendy's presence and political background really cemented her presence in this town, to the point where she is unstoppable. She is powerful. And it just seems like there's never an obstacle. I mean, they'll get thrown wrenches, but it just seems like maybe because of the way she expresses herself, how just put together she comes across. She has her own personal lawyer, which I think he was the advisor of another, I think a political representative, and he went and ended up representing Wendy. Yeah, this is actor Damian Young, who plays Jim Rattlesdorf. Political fixer Jim and Wendy Bird cross paths when she gets involved in local and state wide politics, which that's how you really get to influence things. It's always through the politics. Petty this, drug selling that, that'll get you nowhere. But when you get your hands in dirty politics, that's where you actually see, things come into fruition. And it really does. Because essentially, sorry, I love Wendy. Wendy is played by Laura Linney. Incredible actress. She has how many years of experience? Jason Bateman, too, has been in the industry like 40 plus years or something like that. We're talking about our greats, with a lot of experience. But she, you know, um, just based on her aesthetic, she's also her character in the show is getting all this influence and getting all this traction because of her race. Like, let's just be honest. I don't know necessarily if we were to flip the script and this whole series was taking place in Mexico and our characters, like, we all switched all the races, would it still be believable? Would people be so attached to the characters? She's essentially our Karen here. And though she started off her political career as a Democrat and being thoughtful of what was happening, then she realized that if you don't play dirty, you don't win anything. Which, again, this is what I love about this show, because it really plays into reality so well. I have to say they have to have like some kind of like political analyst dissect how they're going to go into every particular episode, because it is so well written that's why I said it. It was very intimidating for me to even try to dissect this last season, because I love it so much and I respect it so much because it's so near to true life. So anyway, yes, so he starts off as the advisor, her lawyer, Wendy's lawyer, to State Senator Charles Wilkes, and eventually becomes Wendy's advisor, confidant, and informant for the political and business dealings. And they have this like foundation set where people get donations and they offer donations, and when there's like this give and take of donations, that's where the power is attained, right? Like the Locks, when they had that famous song Money, Power, Respect, right? Money, power, respect. I think also it's quoted from Scarface. Money, power, respect. It kind of goes in that order. And you see it. You see it, how it went building up. That it started to really entice Wendy's character. But anyway, but it also started working for Ruth's favor, because she went along with the whole lazy O. And then Jonah, because Jonah is has totally flipped the script on his mother, he offers to money launder for Ruth, and she takes him on as an employee at the Lazy O under the guise of he's working the finances of the hotel. So and we're introduced to now, or we pick up to our Darlene Snell, who was the resident. She's like the flower, green market, green thumb local, who's always at the green market, and pushing her flowers and her organic honey and whatnot, but selling heroin on the low. And she loses her husband of I don't know how many years of marriage. She's a much older gal, and so more or less, Lisa Emery, who plays Darlene Snell, the Ozarks were Darlene and Jacob's, that was her husband, Snell's oyster, until the birds showed up making both parties a constant thorn in each other's sides. Lisa Emery's. Hold on a second. So, needless to say, I don't want to go into every specific because then it's just going to be me reading a bunch of stuff. But yes, Darlene, we are introduced, at least that's why I'm saying it's so crucial to see season 3 for it to kind of more or less make sense for season 4. But we have an understanding that Darlene is off her rocker too. And she's one of these people that also, she's very hot blooded, hot tempered, does not think about the consequences. If she finds you uh, irritating and in her way like a bug, she will squash you. And if that means her shotgun, I mean, again, the show is incredibly violent, but tell me that that's not something that we're used to in entertainment in every sense of the word. But it's not just that. So that's why I'm saying I don't want to make it seem like that's all the show is about, because it's really well written. And she keeps offing people. At this point, also, she's kept a baby, which, again, that's why I have to talk about the other last 3 episodes, how she ended up with this child. But the child isn't hers. She's serving as foster mother. And, has taken on a lover, which happens to be Ruth's cousin, Wyatt. Wyatt, I think, also ended up with her because of the simple fact that he was spiraling out of control when he lost his own father. I think father and uncle or something. But he lost a good chunk of his family tree. And it's all tied to the birds. It's always tied to the birds and the cartel. And that's why I think for a while he was mad at Ruth, because she kept working with Marty and couldn't understand, like, why would you choose outside the family. So, but she was, again, thinking about the well-being of her family, attaining power, attaining status and money. So, but somehow they get back on some kind of level ground as family, and because they're all that they have. They've lost their parents, so they're basically orphans together. And she's grown really attached to him, especially after she lost her lover, Ben. So she decides to help out Darlene and money launder money to Wendy and Marty's, they become a thorn to Wendy and Marty, especially when they have monopolized this area through their boat casino. That's another format of laundering money. And aside from I think they still have a bar. They have a local bar, a local strip club, a funeral house, a number of places where they're money laundering. And now they're going for the big fish of pharmaceuticals with Shaw Enterprises, I think it's called. And this is where we're introduced. It starts to get a little more sticky, because we're introduced to our character of Claire Shaw, another fresh face season. She's the CEO and family of the scandal-ridden pharmaceutical company. The Birds court her to join the foundation and become a distributor for the cartel. And it just becomes so complex, so crazy. And so because now Navarro is supplying this, knowing that it would come back to him tenfold, they don't need anybody to be distributing. And so they make it near impossible for Darlene, who had been doing it since forever, to continue to work and sell her heroin. So it's crazy. It's a roller coaster this season. A sheriff goes missing, the local sheriff that used to look the other way. So then they have 2 temporary sheriffs, trying to investigate, but they never really get a footing of where he ended up. We all know where he ended up. That I won't spoil it for you. And also we're introduced to Navarro's hot-blooded, hot-tempered, hot-head a nephew, who is played here by Alfonso Herrera. Javi, playing Javi Alessandro. we saw an inkling of him for the first few episodes, and then we really see him take shape for the last seven, and that he just like he's just as hot blooded, hot tempered as Darlene. Doesn't even think about the consequences. Just operates on impulse, and so he kills a number of people, and then killed the sheriff, and then so I spoiled it for you. Sorry. And then killed Darlene and Wyatt because just Wyatt was there and was a witness. So that sends Ruth through a spiral. And I think once she lost, she had already gone through so much loss, her own family, Ben, her lover. Now let's add on Wyatt, who's her only last. Aside, well, she does have another cousin, Wyatt's brother, but still, she's lost her whole family in one shot. Honestly, is what she because of the birds, and so she confronts the birds about it and wants him to confess to what is happening and who he is, because she knew that it was tied to the cartel. Because at first she thought it was um, Frank Cosgrove, who's played by Joseph Sikora, who is the son, he's junior, who's the son of Frank Cosgrove Sr., the head of the Kansas City mob. And they're the ones that were responsible for distributing Darlene's heroin. But once they knew that that needed to be nipped in the bud because of the cartel, then she no longer had a distributor. And then, so Cosgrove confronted Darlene after she had suffered a heart attack. And also, not for nothing, you can see that there's such hatred between Wendy and Darlene, and they're constantly at each other's throats. It's like a battle of words, which again is so entertaining to watch. But as Darlene suffered this heart attack, because in finding out that Ruth was going behind her back and still kind of semi working with Marty, somehow they were able to kind of get also on some kind of speaking grounds, even though, and not for nothing, I think Ruth keeps forgiving him because he's the only father figure technically that she's had in her life. Her father was MIA, Wyatt, okay, but he's a kid just like her. So to have somebody compliment her and give her positive reinforcement, it stroked that need that she needed, which was a father in her life. So I think that's why she always kept defending him and semi forgiving him. And we'll get into that with the introduction of the last 7 episodes. But she assumed that now Wyatt had they killed him because of Frank Jr., but that turned out that it wasn't the case. Then she pieces together that it was the cartel. Goes to the birds' beautiful estate and home and realizes that it's tied to that. Jonah's so upset that he lets it known that what his name is, but that's all she has. She's going based on his name, and is like with a shotgun, and she's seeking revenge. And at this point, she does not want to hear it, does not want to know anything about the birds. And Wendy's so concerned about the foundation and losing money, or using their plug, which would be the Navarros, with the pharmaceutical and the leverage that they're building, and the FBI, how they have them in their pocket, and how they have all these state senators in their pockets. Like, she's thinking ahead. And Marty's like, what is wrong with you? Like, how are you not taking into consideration that this girl is going through loss? So here is where, there's a disbalance in the relationship. But I want to say that's because, again, Wendy is kind of like attracted to this life of adrenaline, so, which also often kind of like, I think she uses to kind of make it seem as though she doesn't have to be accountable for all of her heinous actions that she takes on, always under the guise of protecting her family. So Ruth really crumbles here, and I think this is the tipping point where I think that's where we start to see that we're going to say goodbye to Ruth, because I think once she lost her cousin, it's when I think a big portion of her soul, I think, was removed. And so I don't even think that she was like there anymore. She kept thinking about Wyatt, She falls into a very heavy set depression. She does everything in her power to find who the hell this person is, who this Javi person is. And, yeah, Charlotte lets it be known that they were going to meet up in Chicago to introduce um, the CEO of Claire with Javi and how they would operate moving forward. And of course, Javi's already, I'm going to be the successor of my uncle, so I expect to have stocks and bonds and all these crazy things that are like, no, I don't think we could do that legally. And he was like, yeah, you're going to make it happen, because again, he's crazy. And then I forgot to mention that there's a PI that's been following the birds since the beginning of this season. The lawyer was set. No, I'm sorry. The lawyer that met her demise, Helen, was getting a divorce from her former ex-husband. He wants to remarry and couldn't find her, so he hires his PI. And this PI, Adam Rothenberg, who plays Mel Santum, he's just like this incessant fly. But there are people like that like are just really good observers when it comes to human behavior, that he automatically knows that the birds are lying. And he just keeps on layering lies on top of more lies, and also because he's persistent. But he's also a PI because unfortunately he's also an addict, and so he lost his job because he was addicted to cocaine. So he had to become this PI, but when he was on the force, he was relentless. And that's a big no-no for Wendy. Like, we got to do something about this man because he's on my last nerve. So, and so as he keeps digging, and though he was doing it initially because of Helen's ex-husband wanting the signature, he let go from that job. But now we pick up with Wendy's father, and that's how come Wendy's father is introduced in the latter half of the season, because now Wendy's father takes him on as a PI, and so now he continuously keeps digging. And then there's also this whole like goat cookie jar thing that's just incredible because it's very reminiscent of Ben. Ben had said, Ben, who was Wendy's brother and lover of Ruth, had mentioned that, if he had an ideal life, he would just want to have a farm and raise goats. And I think that's why Ruth bought this incredibly big eyesore, but charming at the same time, as a big cookie jar with a goat, which looks very, honestly, like if you like worship the devil, that would be perfect. But again, great kudos to the set designer and the props for getting that thing, because it really just made its mark. And knowing that that's the jar that Ruth chose at some like antique shop to put Ben's ashes. So it's almost like she's looking at Ben, and Ben is just like hovering there, for most of the season. So, yeah, we see that she's thrown for a loop in a tailspin, Ruth, when she loses her cousin Wyatt and is in search of Javi. And we're also introduced to Javi's mom, who is played brilliantly. And I want to say, too, kudos to the actors that they chose. We're not talking about, like, romper room here. Like, we're talking about professionals, people who have years in the theater, have their own theater productions, incredible cast of, like, Mexican actors. Alfonso Herrera has been in the industry for the longest, I think since 2003. Again, it went going in stages. He started like in a teeny bopper show, and then he ended up doing more, serious roles, and now this transition. His mother, who is Veronica Falcón, who plays Camila Elisandro. I mean, the lady is a successful playwright and has been working. The woman knows multiple languages. And our father here, I forget his name, but he's the consultant to Navarro, is played by Bruno Bichir. And if the last name sounds familiar, then we've been acquainted with his brother Damian. That whole family is so incredibly talented. I own a number of like their films from like back in the day. I recommend Todo el Poder as one. This is another one, and again, I'm a big Diego Luna fan too. But these are like Mexico's acting elite. This one's called Un Dulce Olor a Muerte. They're both in here, Damian and Bruno. And the film that I fell in love with Bruno is La Mujer de mi Hermano. This is like the soundtrack, but I also own the film. And he is an incredible talent. That whole family is incredible talent. And I really strongly recommend for you guys to Google their work, Google their acting chops, because it's really there. So kudos to Ozark for employing like this true talent. We're not talking about newcomers. We're talking about seasoned veterans. And I didn't even know this. And Googling now, I was like, Bashir. Bashir always stuck out to me, and now I realize that they're half Lebanese. They're Mexican and Lebanese. That whole family